Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
I'll blame it on the weather. I'll blame it on the weather. It's like nothing's going right. So anyway, welcome once again to another edition of Learning Photography with Duck. As always, I am your host, Duck, and as you can see, today is photo Q&A. So hopefully, hopefully you guys have questions for me. As you can tell, I'll apologize right now. Excuse me. I've been sitting in a room that's been pretty hot all day long, so I'm really dried out today. And I can feel it. As soon as I try to talk, I can feel it. So I'll apologize now. I got a feeling I'm going to be coughing and clearing my throat all evening long. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa for those of you who celebrate those. I had the opportunity to photograph a menorah lighting last week, and that was pretty cool. Small turnout, considering the kind of weather we've been having, but it was a nice evening. I'd say about 60 people turned out. That was really, really nice. So, anywho, and then yesterday, oh my goodness. Yesterday, I did a Photos with Santa event down in Georgetown. They had their Georgetown Christmas Festival and parade. And my good friend, Santa Bill, was Santa, and I photographed about a little over 70 families yesterday, which was kind of cool. So anyway, how you guys been doing? Oh, nice and quiet.
I have a couple of questions, but
I have one question up real quick, Doug.
Okay.
Is there a way that I can, on the fly, get an image to you so you can look at it right now? Because it's part of a question I want to ask, or is
Yeah.
is it through Zoom, or can I go through something else that you'll see, or?
You can eat, well, depends on the size of the file. You're going to send a raw file, right?
Actually, I was going to send, no, I was going to send, it's a JPEG right now, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, you can, if you want to email it, you can email it. Or if you have Dropbox, yeah, probably just email it.
Email it to,
Let me see. Hold on. I don't know. You can try sending it through the chat.
really?
You can do a file. Yeah, you can do a, let's see. You should be able to do a file. Where is it? The third. Here, I'll show you in a second.
I found it.
The third, yeah. I don't know what the file limit is.
We'll find out in a minute.
But yeah.
And then, okay, now send. Oh, it's a biggie. 32 megabytes.
What is it? 32?
32 megabytes.
Okay. There it is. Where do I want to put it? I'll put it on the desktop. And okay, I got it. Okay, so what's the question?
Okay. So here's my question. This is part of my photo restoration project. Now, this is a scan of a 50-year-old negative.
Okay.
And I've done a couple of these, and first time around I was doing all right with it, but it seems like because of well, anyway, what I've been doing with these things, if they look, it looks all right, but when you start looking real close, especially on his pants, you can see all the scratches.
Yes.
And they're everywhere.
Yes.
And so, I guess my first question is: there some sort of AI thing that'll go in and just zap that?
Yeah.
But here's my question. So what I've been doing to these is two things. Is one, going through a process to get rid of the dots.
Yep.
So far, Photoshop Healing Tool seems to be the guy that's the guy I want to use. The problem with that is, though, is you just get tired of clicking around, and you tend to want to do bigger areas, and then you get screwed up. But anyway, so I've been doing that, and then the other thing that I've been doing to these photos is I've been running them through Topaz AI to try and bring out some facial stuff and just clean them up that way. I know I'm going to lose something because of the AI, but because of the quality of the photos to start with, to me it's a fair trade-off. And the other thing I've been doing with photos like this is using Lightroom to separate the foreground from the background.
Okay.
And then I'll do some things. So really my question is, what's the best process or the best sequence of events? What I've been doing originally was cleaning it up with Topaz AI in Lightroom and then sending it over to Photoshop to get rid of the dots and then bringing it back. But then
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I got buggered up, so I was thinking I needed to maybe see what else I can do.
Okay. Let's see.
Now, I did send you a big JPEG, but I'm working with really high resolution TIFFs when I...
Okay, yeah. So you're going to get a little bit more of a dynamic leeway with a TIFF. A TIFF is probably the closest thing to a raw file that you can get. However, it's when you're doing a scan, it's a far cry from a true raw, obviously. Right, because the when you're taking a photograph, what you're recording is the light that's being bounced off of actual three-dimensional objects in your environment, and the camera is able to capture a little bit more of a dynamic range from the environment than a scan would. A scan is just basically picking up the tonality of individual pixels where the scan head goes. So you're not going to get the dynamic range from a scan that you would with a true photograph, and you understand this. All right.
Well, my question is kind of, should I try and get rid of the dots before
All right.
I try to clean up, or clean up and then dots?
Yeah. So if we think about how I teach you guys to handle a editing process is to identify all the problem areas first. Okay. And then, the first part is to normalize an image before you do any kind of artistic edits. Okay. So here you have a situation where you're not handling something that comes straight out of camera. You're tackling something that's, third generation. So the process is going to be a little bit longer, all right? Getting rid of all these spots. The spots is an artifact of the aging process of the negative. It's gathered dust. It's, sat around, rubbing up against God knows what. The emulsion gets damaged, things like that. Okay. Part of your workflow for scanning should be to try to clean the negatives as best as you can. And a lot of people tend to think, these are old negatives. You got to handle them with kid gloves. And to a certain respect, yes, they are fragile to a certain point, but not so fragile that you can't do certain things to them. And one of the things that I would suggest is doing a wet clean on them to try to get any of this particulate that's stuck onto the surface. The problem is you have to be very careful that you don't disturb the particulate to the point where it actually scratches the surface. So you got to kind of be careful. Microcloths are going to be a lifesaver. Okay. And a damp one. This will help kind of clean all the loose debris off of the negative before you actually scan it. And that might reduce your workload down the road. So, you might want to consider that.
Doc,
Yeah.
you said a damp microcloth. How do you make sure it's not too damp where it ruins the negative?
Trust me, you can take these negatives and dunk them in water and they're not going to get ruined.
Thank you.
The emulsion's fixed. Okay. But obviously you don't need it dripping wet. That just creates a mess on your workspace. Okay. You just need a damp cloth to basically just get the dust off. Okay. Don't use any chemicals, just, clean water. All right.
Well, part of my workflow as far as the negatives go is I trot these down to Milter Photo and I go, here, handle it.
Okay.
They're the ones that do the scanning.
Yeah. So.
And I was actually playing around with, give me a regular scan, and they've got a couple different variations. And so this was testing out, give me the really high resolution one.
Yeah. So before dropping it off.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have a loop or a magnifier?
Yes.
Okay. So what I would do is just give it a once over. The other thing you can do is you can use a moistened cotton swab. If there's any spots, water spots or big chunks of dirt that need to be removed, you can use cotton swabs to help with the process as well. So yeah, don't be afraid of cleaning them prior to sending them out. That may fix a good chunk of your problems here. But no matter what, you're going to get spots. And, because we're also dealing with acetate. Acetate, as it's being handled, does pick up an electric charge. So it's very staticky. And, dust particles are just going to be sucked to it like a magnet and just cling to it. So it's a never-ending battle when it comes to working with negatives. But you want the negatives to be as clean as possible before you scan them. All right. So tackling this. All right. So the first step in any editing process is to normalize your image. That means get your image looking the best possible before you start doing any artistic edits. So if we think about it, all right, all these little spots, that's going to be part of the normalizing. All right, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get as clean an image as possible before you take it to that next step. Hey, Fred, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Doc, nice to see you.
So yeah, unfortunately, there is no easy way of getting rid of these spots. You know, but there's a couple utilities that I can probably show you. All right, and I've actually built some presets with this. All right, and my preset, I call it my dust and scratch. Oops, my dust and scratch. Okay, and all that does is, oh, wait a minute, is it not? No, that's not the one. Hold on, where is it? Where is it? Oh, my spot removal. Here it is, my spot removal. Okay, it's a short little script. All right, let me play it. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and all it is a curves adjustment that does the zigzag. Okay. And what this does is it really just displaces the tone map. So instead of going from black to white, it says, okay, I'm going to take my blacks, I'm going to raise them up. And the next zone, which is my dark grays, all right, instead of keeping them very similar in tonality, I'm going to boost them up and make them brighter. Okay, so it's taking the black zone, keeping it, brightening it up a little bit, but taking the next zone over and really just elevating it into the really bright zone. And then the next zone, which is the midtones, dropping it back down. So you can see what happens is it creates a little bit more contrast between each of these zones, and we get a crazy looking image like this. But the nice thing about this is if I zoom in here, it makes all those spots really, really stand out now. Okay.
Oh,
Look at that. Makes it so much easier. Okay. Now, unfortunately, it's also creating a lot of contrast in the grain. All right, this is a very grainy image to begin with, okay? So you just kind of have to look past the grain and then just kind of look for all those spots, all right? And if at any point you get a little bit distracted, you just simply take the eyeball here, all right, the little eyeball here, and just turn it off. Oops. Turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. Okay. So, like, for example, all right, this is actually a great example. In this area here, you can really see all these spots really stand out. But here, we're not seeing anything. It all just looks grainy. Okay. But as soon as we turn off this thing here, we can see these kind of stand out, right? And the reason being is because these here and these already have a high contrast to start with. Okay, so you can see they already have a high contrast. So you have to kind of pay attention to where you use this spot check layer, okay? Because it's not always going to show it, okay? But here, you can see a little bit here, and as soon as we turn it on, those spots really, really stand out, okay? All right, so that's one trick that you might want to do, and then just work back and forth. All right. So what I would also suggest, and you've heard me say this before, and I know you guys are hesitant to do so, but really consider getting a tablet, a pen tablet, instead of a mouse. You can fly so much faster with this than with a mouse.
You mean the one I've had for a year and a half and haven't installed yet?
Yeah, that one. Okay.
That one, yeah.
All right. So
I think what you say every time I start this exercise, I think, oh man, I gotta back up and get this going.
yeah,
I use a trackball.
trackball is still not as fast. All right. So watch.
I can flip with my thumb. I'm left-handed. I can write cursive with my right hand with my trackball.
Really? Okay. Well, they can consider me amazed here because
But
that's
I can
not an
fly
easy.
across the screen because remember that's only a half a roll with my thumb.
Right. Right. Yeah, but we're talking.
I can do very fine things with it.
Oh, okay. Well, if that's the case, kudos.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
know, I find that most people with a mouse, you know, it's a
Like,
clumsy.
the mouse is not the way to go.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even consider a mouse.
Yeah. So the first thing I do is I create a blank layer. Oh, there you go. That's a trackball. There you go. Okay. Now we very recently covered doing the spot healing, and there's a couple tools here that you can choose from. There's the spot healing brush tool and the remove tool. And as I mentioned, the remove tool kind of relies on Adobe Sensei, Adobe AI to work its magic. So it's a little slow because it's got to communicate between the cloud and your machine. So that will slow down your process right off the bat. But for spot removals, you really don't need it because the AI isn't really building anything intricate. We're just removing spots. Okay, so the spot healing brush, and I'm going to size it down. I usually size it down to a little larger than the spots you're going to work on. Okay, the other reason I like the pen is because the pen nib is pressure sensitive. How are you, Howard? Thanks for joining us. All right, the tip is pressure sensitive, so I can control the size of my pen nib on the screen to accommodate the different sizes of the spots. Okay, so actually, let me see if I can zoom in.
That's true. I also have one. And that makes sense.
Yeah. So here we have all these spots. All right. I've created a, we'll call it my spot removal layer. Okay. And you want to make sure that sample all layers is activated. Otherwise, you're going to be, working this and like, it's not doing anything. Okay. And all you're going to do is just paint over these, and you can see how it is monotonous, it is tedious, it is monkey work, as I call it. Okay. That you can just kind of go through and fly very, very quickly when you have the a pen. All right, because it's literally just like writing. Okay. And then when you have a large spot like this, okay, I just paint back and forth until I cover it. And all right, But for the most part, all these little ones, it's just literally a dab, 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 dab. All right. And because I can control the pressure on the pen, bigger dust spots, I'm going to press a little harder to get that brush a little larger. And then for little stuff, I just barely touch the tablet. Okay. So you can see that I can very, very quickly go through and start cleaning up all these spots. Okay. As a product photographer, this is not a foreign task to me. Oh my God. Some products, you look at it and you pull them out right out of the package and they look all nice and shiny and new. And then you photograph them and then you realize that it's just covered in dust. And it's amazing what the camera will pick up in some of these products. Okay. So now, I don't know if you guys can see this. All right. But it's very obvious for me. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more here. Okay. As I'm going along and hitting all these spots, it's putting it onto a blank layer. So I can take that blank layer, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. But if you notice, when it applies that fix over the underlying image has a lot of grain to it. Okay? As I do all these spots, you'll notice that the spots are very soft. It's not replicating the grain. All right. The process is just to kind of, mask the underlying thing. And it's kind of, sampling from the area around the spot to build the little area that's going to mask these spots. All right. So there's a little bit of softness. Okay. And it's very noticeable. All right. Usually, when you're dealing with an image that's coming right off your camera, unless you're shooting at a high ISO, this is never an issue. But in this particular case, it's as if this was shot at a high ISO. That's why you get such an amount of grain. Okay. So now the thing is, before I do anything further with this, I want these spots to kind of, match. So I might want to, let's see, noise, let's see. Can we add noise to it? Yeah, we should be able to. All right, so add a little bit of noise. All right, and actually, it takes a lot of noise for these things. Okay, so all you got to do is just look at these little spots that you've created. All right, and when it starts blending in and not being as visible, I don't know if you guys can see it. All right, I have like almost no grain. You can kind of see these spots right here, right here, right here, right? And as soon as I start increasing, really increasing it, you can see how it's starting to blend in a little bit better. And then you just hit OK. All right. And then but do this at the very end when you got all your spots taken care of. All right. And all you do is, like I said, you're going to spend some time. How much time you want to spend on this is entirely up to you. Okay. But because of the quantity of spots, there's really no easy way of applying a more what's the term, a fix that uses, you know, the blurring effect. There's a couple techniques that will allow you to get rid of these just by basically duplicating your layer, applying a smart blur, and then just using a mask to kind of mask these areas out. But unfortunately, that's just going to create more of a problem with this simply because of the grain. So I wouldn't suggest that. Okay. So unfortunately, buddy.
There's two things I've noticed. Well, this is restoration work, so let's.
This is, yeah. So yes,
But the one thing I am going to do is, before I start any more work on Hound Dog Taylor here, I'm going to make sure my pen is installed. But two things I noticed when doing this kind of work, if you're going to start doing it, you got to finish.
Yes.
Because if you get rid of 70% of the dots, it will look worse than if you left them all there.
Yes.
And then the other thing I found is if you're going through and you go, oh, I did really good, I got rid of all the dots, and you take another look at it, and then all the ones you didn't see the first time come into focus.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually brings up a good point, because you might want to consider not getting too close into your work. All right, because you can literally just come in and just as it starts turning into the individual pixels, I mean, you can come down and some of these spots are only 2, 3, 4 pixels, you know, in size. Do you need that kind of fine control? All right. No, usually not. Okay. So what I suggest, don't zoom in like this. Keep it a little bit out. Okay. That way your eye goes to all the big dots first. All right. And that will allow you to kind of target those big ones. All right. So you guys know the technique. When you go out with your camera, you want to shoot wide, then shoot medium, and then shoot narrow, right? Kind of the same premise here. Start really, really wide, okay? Because that will allow you to kind of really see all the big stuff, all right? And then once you get all, and you know, possibly work in quadrants, you know, say I'm gonna work in this upper left-hand corner, and I'm just gonna get all the big dots, and it's boring. I understand it is, you know, and just get rid of all the big stuff. Put on a set of headphones, listen to some music. If you like audiobooks, there's a great opportunity. All right. Once you get all the big stuff, then go ahead and zoom in. Where's my zoom in? Okay. And get the medium stuff. Okay. And every so often, so that you don't go cross-eyed, just zoom out. Okay. And you're going to notice that when you zoom out, that little fine stuff no longer makes a difference. Okay. Unless you're going to be printing a high resolution, you know, 14 by 17, you probably don't even need to go into the weeds, you know, with that micro peeping. Okay. So start off, you know, really broad. All right. This looks like water, little water particles. This is what that reminds me of. Like somebody wiped wiped the negative, you can see the streaks. All right. And it left water behind, and that water dried up and left that mineral residue. I have a feeling if you were to take a damp microcloth, you can probably get rid of all that stuff. Okay.
Considered I was the guy that made these. I've developed these negatives. It's sloppy in my cleanup.
Well, you know, also they've been in storage for a number of years. You know, who knows what could have happened somewhere along the way. You know. So.
Well, a friend of mine, he stored, this is audio, he stored a 7-inch audio reel in his home office for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave it to me because he wanted it dubbed to MP3s.
Right.
And I farmed it out to somebody else because I just didn't want to, because I wanted the stuff that was on there too.
Right.
But what he didn't understand was, even though it's a finished basement, 30 years in a finished basement is 30 years of moisture.
Moisture, mold, mildew, heat, cold. All that does damage.
So what my friend did, because it was really moisture damage. So if I try, well, first of all, I don't have a reel-to-reel tape recorder, but a friend of mine does. So I gave it to him, and he had to, quote, bake it. There is something.
Oh, yes.
Can you do that with a negative? Is what I'm getting at. Can you, this thing, and I don't know what it is, it's something that bakes the, and takes the moisture out of the tape. Is there such a thing?
There is. I have heard of the process. You have to be very careful. It depends on the age of the film and things like that. So basically what they're doing is they're getting the moisture level back to where it needs to be. Because obviously if the negative is too dry, you can have separation of the emulsion from the film. If it's not stored in a light-proof box over time, you could have fading. Because we're talking about heavy metals on the surface of these negatives that are susceptible to all kinds of environmental damage. So, but yes, I have heard of that baking process. I've never had to deal with it, so it's not like I'm overly familiar with it, but I have heard what you're talking about. You need special cabinets for that.
But it took a lot of work, and my friend said, the one who gave me the tape to have done, I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And it's like, hey, a basement, whether it's finished or not, is damp.
Yep. Okay, so once you have gone through and eliminated all these little spots, then at that point you can go ahead and do whatever corrections you want to do. Okay, that means possibly setting your black and white points, and if you want to do any dodging and burning, that's when you'll do it. Okay, the thing is that you're not going to have the same flexibility of really manipulating your exposure with a scan file that you would with a raw file. It's just not there. With a raw file, you can push the shadows 5 stops and be able to pull something out of that. Here you won't be able to, because it's not recognizing any detail that may be in those shadows. Okay, those shadows are baked in. There's really no way of reclaiming any information out of there. Same thing goes with any highlights. Anything that's blown out, good luck getting any kind of recovery on that. The other problem you're going to run into is because of the grain. If you go a little bit too hard with the grain, then it's just going to accentuate that grain even more. Okay. So you may want to do something to control the grain before you start getting into some of those edits. Run it through whatever AI program you happen to have. Do your edits, and then afterwards go in and do your sharpening to kind of bring back some of that detail that gets softened during the grain reduction. So that would be my suggestions to you, Bri, because you got a lot of work.
Well, and this particular one that I like, for instance, I've got of this set of this guy here, I've got 7 or 8 photos. 2 or 3 of them are really good. A couple of them, but I'm kind of thinking what you said. On some of these, I don't think I'll go hog wild, because
Right.
This one right here, for instance, isn't that great of a photo to start with. He's looking the wrong way and all that other kind of stuff. But
Hey, Doug,
Yeah.
you do this a little different than I do, and I try to do it your way, and I just couldn't get it to do. When I do spot removal, I do it on the picture itself or an actual copy of the background. You take a plain
A blank layer, yeah.
But the thing is, how come I'm able? Oh, you use a black pen?
Blank layer.
Okay, I know blank layer, but
Yeah.
it doesn't work for me. What are you doing that I'm not doing?
Okay.
Yeah.
What you'll want to do is really look up here and make sure that all these settings are set up properly. All right.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm not saying, I'm not
Okay.
saying this, up on top.
Up on top. All
Hold on,
right.
let me
So,
think here. Hold on,
Yeah.
Doug. Let me, normal, content.
yeah,
aware.
content aware. Okay. Sample all layers. Make sure that is really, really clicked in.
Okay.
Okay. And everything else should be the default. Okay.
Take it off of there, please.
Yep,
Let me take a
yep.
picture. Hold on.
But make sure, make sure that sample all layers is activated and content aware is activated.
Content aware and
Sample all layers.
sample all layers.
Yep.
What are create texture and proximity match? Nothing.
So proximity match, well, let's see. Create texture. I don't know. I'm not, let's see.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'm gonna try something. Hold on. Let's see.
Oh, actually, you know what? Oh, yes. All right. So, here's the problem right here. Okay. That spot. Okay. I got a little bit too close, and it's actually picking up the lightness from that area next to it when I don't want it to. All right. So we got a spot that now, let me back that up. Okay. All right, you got to be careful. Yeah, see, it wants to brighten it up. Okay. Whereas content aware realizes that, hey, these are dark pixels. Okay. And proximity match, I got a feeling will do the same thing. It tries to pick up what's adjacent to it. Okay. And you can see in this particular case, okay, because we have such a high degree amount of texture because of the grain. It's doing some funky artifact here. It made a big blob of black, and that's not what I want. All right. Oops. Get rid of the zoom. So let me back that up. So I usually keep it on content aware. It just kind of tracks what's around it and tries to rebuild what you're trying to cover up based on, you know, the localized area.
Okay, I got it to work. Thanks, Doug. I think
You got it?
problem
Okay.
is I didn't do sample all layers. Okay,
Yeah.
it's worked.
That's a very common one. I've done it, you know, myself. Okay. The other thing is, all right, for the most part, I find that this tool does a really, really, really good job. But if you find that, you know, because it's in this particular case, it's a little bit soft, the other tool you might want to look into is the clone stamp. Okay. The clone stamp tool, what that does, it says, okay, I have an area here I need to camouflage. All right. I want the texture from this area to be applied over this spot. So it's a two-step process, so it's a little bit slower. Okay. You have to have one finger on the Alt key. All right. And what you'll do is, here, let me find an area. Here we go. Okay. What I do is I have the my finger on the Alt key, and when I press the Alt key, it turns into a sample reticle, and I'll tap next in the vicinity of the spot that I want to remove. Okay. And then what that does is it takes that area that's underneath the cursor, and now when I slide it over, it applies it. Okay. So this may be preferable in a situation like this where you do have a lot of grain, because it's going to preserve that grain, because all it's doing is it's literally copying a small chunk and placing it where you want. Okay. The caveat to that is you have to pay attention to the area you are sampling. All right. One of the problems that happens is when you are very close, it's often hard to see the big picture. All right. And you may be seeing, oh, okay, I'm picking up this texture here. All right. So this little texture here, that looks the same as this little texture here, which kind of looks the same as this texture here, except this is a little bit lighter, which is the same as that texture there. All right. And even here, you say, okay, this little texture here is the same as that one, which is the same as that one. But if we really analyze it, there's something that's running here, and there's something that's running here. All right. Even though to our eyes in the screen, this looks the same as this, in reality, it is not. So if you're not careful, especially if you're working in larger areas, you can actually duplicate something that is visually there that you don't really notice at first into this other area. And, you know, you can be replicating a button on a shirt. All right. You can be replicating, you know, rivets, whatever, you know, wires, some kind of wood texture. All right. It's not readily visible on the screen, but the data is there. So when you copy it over, and you print it out, suddenly you're printing out something that, wait a minute, these rivets look like they're all in the really weird places. Why are there rivets all over the place? Okay, well, that's because you copied and pasted it, even though you didn't see it. So, fair warning. All right, hope you understand what I mean by that. Okay. This process can be a little bit slower simply because it's a two-step process. You have to press, hold, pick your sample area, bring it over, and then click down. All right. But after a while, it gets really, really, fast. Especially if you have the ability to utilize a pen, because a pen allows you to just literally just do this all the time, and that's just you're just tapping the surface of your tablet, so make a selection, click or tap, slide it over, tap, make a selection, tap, 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 tap. That's all I'm doing. Tap, tap. Okay. Tap, 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 tap. Okay. So you can move fairly quickly here. And I'm actually a little bit too tight on this. I should be out a little bit more. Here we go. Okay. Now I can see. All right. Here's a perfect example. These are shingles. The shingles have streaks. Okay. See the streaks in them? They're very obvious when you're zoomed out. Okay. As soon as I zoom in, can you see the streaks? It's very hard to see the streaks. Oops. All right. So you have to be careful. Okay. All right. Any questions, Brian?
Hey, unmuted. No, that was good. I didn't know about, I guess, the layer method either. I like that. That'll come in handy.
All right. So the reason being, okay, is that like, for example, one of the things that I mentioned is that I can now go back just to that layer that I did all this work for. All right, and say, okay, now I need to match the grain to the underlying image. Okay, and I can apply another effect to it. I can apply a noise adjustment in order to make it match. If I was working directly on the image, guess what? I can't do that. Because if I apply some kind of noise to tackle all those little soft spots, all the little soft spots that I just created, guess what it's going to do to the areas that already have a lot of noise? It's going to bump that noise up even more. Okay. So yeah, work on a separate layer. The other thing is, if
you lost me with that.
Okay, so all right, so what I mentioned earlier with the spot removal tool. Okay. Let me do an. All right, I'm gonna tackle this shingle right here. All right, so you guys can see it. All right, and what I'm doing is I'm using the spot healing brush. Okay, spot healing brush. I'm working on a separate layer, on a blank layer. All right, and I'm just gonna go in. I'm gonna come in. I'm like gonna spot be gone. Okay. And I've taken that shingle now and I've gotten rid of all those spots. See? Toggle it off, toggle it on. All those spots are gone. Okay. But now if I zoom, oh, turn it back on. If I zoom in, okay, you can see
Ooh,
how soft those spots are, right?
yes.
Okay. Because it's not a perfect tool. Okay. It doesn't work very well with super grainy images. All right. So that's why I said if you don't want to be bothered with this and you don't mind doing a slightly slower version, all right, the clone stamp tool might be a better solution because that handles the texture. Okay.
I can see that. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So now I say, well, you know, I got all these little spots here that are very soft. Now I gotta fix it. So, you know, I'm gonna go filter, noise, add noise, and I'm going to, you know, try to create some kind of noise level, a little bit too much, to kind of have it camouflage into the underlying layer. Okay. So that's a separate step, but now I can do that because it's a separate layer. All my little spots are independent of the underlying image.
Okay.
Okay. If I were to work directly on the image, all right, all the areas that I did not work on, and I apply a sharpening, guess what happens? It's going, I mean, a noise. What happens is I'm going to be adding noise on top of already noisy image. Okay. So yeah, it'll blend into soft spots, but guess what it's going to do to the rest of the image? It's going to apply an unneeded effect, right? Make sense now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So the other thing is, you know, you can say, oh, you know what? For some reason, you know, you felt you made a mistake. Well, you know, now I can go in with my eraser and I can say, okay, I'm just going to backtrack and just clear out this section. All right, just erase all these spots here. Okay, because they are on a separate layer. All right, let me bring my opacity up 100. Okay, so I can undo areas if I need to, and this is what's meant by working non-destructively. Okay, because if I were to just create a copy of my base image and work directly on that base image, if at any point I need to backtrack, guess what? I have to delete that whole entire image, make a new duplicate, and start all over again. I cannot tackle small areas. I can't say, oh, you know, I gotta fix this area. Let me just erase that. Okay? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So again, I can't stress enough the ability to really fly with a pen. You know,
Okay,
it,
so-
it makes it's going to make your job so much easier.
So this is kind of a follow-up question, but
Yep.
I guess almost my original question. So I've got this negative right here. Excuse me. I just got this negative back from Milford Photo. I've loaded it into Lightroom. So would the next thing to do would be to ship it over to Photoshop and do it there?
Okay.
The part of what I've noticed is that when I'm done in Photoshop, then, I've done all this stuff, but when I go back to Lightroom, which I'm using to manage my photos, and that, I don't know, I haven't figured out how to save that level of, Photoshop, or if I need to, because
Okay.
send it off to Photoshop, it comes back as a different file.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Lightroom is awesome for processing raw photos. That's what it's for. All right. That's why Photoshop uses Adobe Camera Raw, which is Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw. They're identical. They're twins to each other. Okay. Accessed from two different programs. Okay. But they suck for JPEGs and, So what I would do is import them into Lightroom. That way it allows you to, to look at your collection, be able to sort them, manage them, pick which ones you want to edit, which ones you're going to kind of like archive, the whole 9 yards. Okay. You might even say, you know what, let me do a low level noise reduction in Photoshop, in Lightroom as part of the normalizing part of the process. Okay. You have to be careful because any kind of noise reduction does tend to kill edges. And edge fidelity suffers. And when edge fidelity suffers, you get images that look visually soft. All right, so you have to be very careful. All right. Maybe do a test. See, take the same image, do one with noise reduction at the very beginning, and then one with noise reduction at the very end, and compare the quality. All right, so maybe just do a small little sample area of the same image, okay, with two slightly different processes. All right, but I got a feeling the way I would handle this is I would bring them into Lightroom just for organization only. All right. And then do everything else in Photoshop. Wow, Duck is saying do this in Photoshop and he's the Lightroom guy. Yes, because there's so much work that these files need that have to be done in Photoshop. It does not make any sense, in my opinion, to be bouncing it back and forth. All right. So, like I said, try one where you do a little noise reduction at the beginning. All right. Basically, just do a copy, do a virtual copy. All right. Apply the noise reduction to the virtual copy, and send both the one just scanned and the one with the noise reduction applied, send them both to Photoshop. It's going to open them up in two separate files, and just do a little section. All right, save it, bring them both back into Lightroom, and then the one you did not apply the noise reduction, go ahead and apply noise reduction to that one. So in the end, you'll have the same exact image, and they've both been edited the same way in Photoshop, and they've both had noise reduction applied, except one got it at the beginning, the other one got it at the end. That's the only difference. Okay, and see which one retains the edge fidelity best. Okay, and then just base your workflow from then on that way. All right, and I'm just using Lightroom as an example. If you have other AI tools that do noise reduction, apply the same thing. All right, do one at the beginning, and the other file, do it at the end. Compare the two, see what gives you the best result. Okay.
Yeah, part of that, I am using Topaz to do some of that. And then the other thing you just mentioned about Photoshop. Did we go over this last time? Now we can, it's better at separating foregrounds and backgrounds and subject matter now.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
So
a big Lightroom thing that I'm loving.
all right. So so how you do it, there's a few techniques. Okay. So like, for example, let's take this image that you sent me. You say, okay, well, I want to separate them a little bit. All right. The first thing you want to do is you want to map how you want to separate them. Okay. Because separating a subject from the background, you can approach it any number of ways. Okay. Because all it is you're just basically increasing the contrast between the foreground object and the background object, correct? Okay. And how do we increase contrast? Well, we can increase contrast with luminosity. We can increase contrast with color. We can increase contrast with texture. Okay. Well, there's no colors here, so that's out of the equation. All right. So what's left is luminosity, okay, lights and darks, and texture. All right. And we have a lot of different textures going on here. We have the texture of the grain. All right. And we also have the texture of the depth of focus. Okay. So what we can do is we can isolate our subject and say, okay, I'm just going to throw a, select subjects, see what it does. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know why. Because I am doing on my spots. Okay. I'm just going to do a Control Alt Shift E, make a clone stamp layer. Okay. Select subject. Let's see what it does. Does an okay job. All right. The quality of your subject isolation is going to be dependent on your mask. So whatever it does, you're going to need to come in and do a little bit of cleanup. All right. Take your time. Okay, because it's only as good as your mask. All right, and you can see it left a lot of this guitar untouched. All right, the slide on his hand, missed it. It's getting some of the background in there. So you're just gonna have to come in, and depending on how much manipulation you're going to do to that background, you may not need to get overly crazy with your selection. Okay. So you just come in, you clean up your selection, do what you got to do. Make it the best possible. All right. You might want to say, okay, well, this part of the stage I also want to include because, obviously that's going to be in focus along with the subject. Okay. All right. Once you have your subject, all right, and I'm missing his face here. I'm just going to do very quick here just to show you. Once you have your subject selected, okay, you're going to do a couple of things. One, you're going to create a duplicate. All right. So edit, let's see, what is it? Select, where is it? See, I'm so used to shortcut keys. Control J. Oops, Control J. Okay. And all that does is it isolates my subject based on the selection I made, right? Okay. But I'm also need to remove the subject from the background because I'm going to blur the background. And if you blur the background with the subject, that subject, when it blurs out, is going to create a halo around the subject that you just cut out. Okay. So I have my cutout and I have my background. Okay. So I go back to my cutout and I press and hold the control key or option key and click on it. It's going to bring back my selection. Okay. Then make sure that you have the base layer selected. So you're going to select the lower layer. You're going to go to select modify, expand. Okay. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take our selection and we're going to increase the size of it. Okay. And I don't know, 4, 6, 8 pixels. You don't need a lot. Okay. Go ahead. All right. Now I'm just going to hide this so you can see what it's going to do. Okay. All right. And I'm going to take that and with the new AI tool. Okay. Oops. The new AI tool here. Okay. Where it says generative fill. If I leave that alone, okay. All right. Don't type anything else in it and just hit generate. It's going to remove the image or the subject. Okay. There you go. All right, and we don't need. Okay. Now there's a little residual. All right, but that's a residual from my poor masking. Okay, that's okay. Oops, cancel. Let's go to. All right. Okay. Where am I? Bring this up. I'm gonna go ahead and just get rid of that. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Oh, yeah, let's rasterize that. Okay, get rid of that. We don't need any of that. Okay. So now when I click it off, you see that my subject is gone. So now all I got to do is take that layer and apply a blur, Gaussian blur. Let me go ahead and merge that down. Okay. Blur, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay. Any blurring effect that you want. If you want to do, something that kind of mimics a camera, use a lens blur, whatever you want. Okay. I'm going to blur it a lot. Okay. It applies to blur. Now, when I bring my subject back in, okay, he's nice and isolated against a blurred background. Okay. But if we come in, you're going to see a major discrepancy here. All right. When I blurred my background, it got rid of all that noise. Okay. but we still have a noise on the part of the image that we preserved. So I'm going to need to come back in, filter, where is it? Filter, noise, add noise. Okay. Preview, too much. Okay. There we go. Add noise. We're good to go. All right. And now it kind of matches in. Okay. Now I did a very quick and crappy mask job. Obviously, you want to do a better job. All right. And I wouldn't suggest going that radical with the blur. All right. Because it at this point, it looks fake. Okay. But that's how you can isolate your subject from your background using texture.
And you know, Doug, what you just made me think that it does look a little fake. On the other hand, you know, what I'm working with here is, again, this is 50-year-old restoration.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I see some of the other people, what they do to restore, you know, throw like, it looks like a carpet on it or something, or any other thing that, you know, and really what I'm trying to show off in these things is the guy, you know.
Right.
Not so much the, you know, what's going on around him. And, you know, so if I overdo the blur to show off him, then, so two thing you did is, now I guess I'm going to get more up to date with selecting backgrounds and foregrounds in Photoshop. I just got real good at it in Lightroom.
Yeah. Well, okay. So yeah. An effect like this where you're changing the actual structure of the pixels, you want to make sure that your selection is really on point. If all you're doing is manipulating your exposure by only a few points, then you can get away with a very, very loose mask. All right. So the equivalent. All right. Let me get rid of all of this.
Well, you know, too, the other thing this will do, Duck, is that all these dots we've been talking about for the last hour.
Yep.
Mainly when I want to get rid of these dots, in this case, they're on the musician. I don't really care as much about all those dots in the rafter, because if I
Right.
can do what we're just doing now, that blurring and all that other stuff will make those dots disappear.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Okay. So if you want to manipulate, if you want to use luminosity to create separation, all right, this goes back to the previous lesson where we used curves adjustments. Okay. So I want to separate him from the background. So what I want to do is use the squint test. Okay. Here's a big problem with this particular image. All right. We see our background here. All right. This is a demarcation line. Everything up here is dark. Everything down here is light, right? And we have our subject. Here's the demarcation line for the subject. Here it's dark. Here it's light. Okay? So it literally lines up with what we got going on. It happens, you know. You can't change that. It's just the way it was. Okay? But now with editing, we can correct for that. All right? So what we have is a light shirt against a light background. Okay? Now the background is a little bit darker than the shirt, right? If we do the squint test, what really stands out? Okay, if we do the squint test, the shirt stands out, the guitar stands out, and the cymbal stands out. Okay, everything else kind of blends in together and into this mush. All right. We have a separation here with the pants because they're standing out against a lighter background, but his head is dark against dark. So that's the biggest issue with this particular image, right? So what we can do is we can say, okay, I want to darken the background overall, pretty much everything. Okay, I'm going to darken the light part and I'm going to darken the dark part. Okay, because I want to create contrast. All right, so if I want to bring his head forward, I'm going to lighten his head. All right, so that means everything behind his head I want to darken. I want to create as much separation. All right, so I'm going to use a global adjustment, curve adjustment. I'm going to darken down that background. Okay, not so much to the point where it starts looking like really underexposed. All right, so there's a fine line that you can push here. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down. Okay, and I'm going to say I'm going to use the mask. All right, and I'm going to use the mask to isolate very specific parts. So I'm going to use a nice soft round brush. Okay, here's my nice soft round brush. Okay, and with black as my foreground color right here, and my mask is selected, I'm going to go ahead and paint in right here. All right, and any areas that kind of overlapped, I'm just going to switch to white and paint that back in. Okay, so now all I did is just very, very minor boost of the blacks down and the kind of like midtones down. Okay, and I kept everything else on him the original exposure. All right, makes sense? Follow that? Follow what I did? Okay. There's my original exposure. I burned everything but him down. Okay. And you know what? I might even say, you know, let's keep the front of the stage lit just to add a little bit of balance to all that darkness. Okay. After all, he is standing in sunlight, right? And we can kind of fake that the back of the stage is going to be in shadow. We can fake it. All right. All right. So now I want to make him stand out a little bit more. So what I want to do is create a new adjustment. All right. Curves adjustment. Okay. And this time I want to brighten the brights. Okay, but I don't want to brighten the darks too much because then it's going to start looking washed out. Again, we have to find that balance where it starts looking fake. We don't want to go into that area. Okay, so for this, I'm going to consider using the sample tool. Okay, the point sample. Okay, this point sample allows me to go directly to the image. Actually, let me go ahead and zoom in here. Okay, directly to the image. All right, and I'm going to pick on an area of the bright part of his hair, and I'm going to drag it up. Okay. And just like in Lightroom, where you move one slider, everything's attached to it. Okay. It's the same thing here. All right. Here is our point. Everything else is attached. All right. So if I move that point up and down, everything along that line is going to move with it, right? So now as I move that point up, the shadows opened up. I'm now going to pick a point in the shadow part of his hair, and I'm going to bring it down. Okay. All right. And see this part of the curve? All right. See how it bowed upward into the light? Okay. So that by default brightened up his shirt, which I don't mind. Okay. I don't mind because that's what I wanted to do anyway. Okay. So what this does is it creates an S curve. Okay. An S curve. And an S curve is a great way of creating contrast because what it's doing, it's saying make my lights lighter, make my darks darker. All right. And it's in essence creating separation from here. Make sense? Okay. So now this layer affected everything. It's a global layer because you can see my mask is completely blank. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to apply it just for my character. Okay. And I can do one of two ways. I already have a mask that I built. I can just copy it and invert it, or I can just go ahead and grab my brush. All right. Go ahead and select my mask, invert it, Control Command I to invert it. Okay. And with white as my foreground color, I'm just going to come in and paint on my subject. And at that point, I can just paint on the areas that I want to manipulate. Okay. So maybe the bright areas here. X, and just avoid the dark areas. Okay. So let me zoom out a little bit. So now if I toggle that on and off, you can see how it brightened up his face. Okay. Brightened up his face, brightened up the highlight of the hair, but it kept the shadow part of his hair in place. Okay, so let me go full out. All right. Now, because we're working in chunks and little parts, we're targeting individual sections, we can fine tune this as needed. All right. So I can always come back to this and say, okay, well, you know, maybe my whites are a little bit too bright. Okay. And maybe these here need to be a little bit darker. All right. Where does this lie? This lies kind of like in between those two. All right. So maybe we take those and darken them down. Okay. Now you got to remember everything is attached. All right. See how as I wiggle it above that point, it's also being affected. All right, I might want to come back in, make a point, and add a little correction. Okay, so it's just finding that balance. Okay. All right. Now, if I continue pushing this, I can say, you know what? It's starting to get a little bit convoluted, all right? Because I had a nice, actually, yeah, I had a nice S curve, and my S curve is now gone, okay? So you can say, okay, you know what? I'm going to leave that there. Let me make this a little bit darker. I'm going to leave that there, all right? But I'm going to add another curve, All right, and I want to tackle just the pants. All right, so this part I want to drop down, and the highlight areas I want to bring up. All right, go back to my mask, invert it, Control or Command I to invert it. Get my brush, white as my foreground color, and then just paint on the area that I want to fix. Okay. And if you notice, I'm just brushing. I'm not doing any kind of fancy mask selections. I'm just brushing. All right. So if we look at my mask, it's kind of sloppy looking. Here's this mask. Look how sloppy that one is. All right. So this is more like what you would do in Lightroom. If you were to look at your masks in Lightroom, they kind of look like this when you use, the brush tool, all right, or with the radial tool. Okay. Does that help you out?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So tackle the problem areas. All right. So here's another one, the symbol. I'll create another one. Click on my little point tool here. Come here. I'm going to drag that down. You know what? By a lot. Actually, you know what? Let me just bring that down there. I'll just bring that point down. Okay. Invert it. Control Command I. Get my brush. All right, white as my foreground color, and I'm just going to tone that down. Okay, and if I overpaint, I can just come in. All right, and if that's a little bit too much, there we go. There we go. Okay.
So while we're on this same stage, different musician, I was excuse me, I was playing around with the generative AI.
Yep.
And in one of the photos, there was a camera person photographer up in front. I didn't want him there, so I got rid of him.
Yeah.
And it just might do a pretty good job of just getting rid of that symbol.
Yeah. Yeah.
First thing I noticed, because in one of the other ones, I got rid of the bass player too. And a lot of that junk on the bottom in another picture the floor was pretty messed up, and
Right. Yeah.
it did a surprising job of cleaning all that up. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Just remember, you have a limited number of generations with that AI.
right.
So, but hopefully this gives you a place to start and kind of a foundation to work off of. Yep.
My final question on this. So what you've convinced me to do with moving forward with this is that I think the majority of the work should be done in Photoshop.
Yes.
And like wanted to manage this in Lightroom just for cataloging purposes. So I put this thing in Lightroom and I've, done a couple things maybe, but now I've shipped it off to Photoshop. And I've done all my stuff, and there's some more stuff I want to do tomorrow, but I'm done for today. So what do? Do I just save it in Photoshop? Because it seems like when you save it, it wants to ship it back to Lightroom.
Okay, so just hit Control S, save it. Once you save it, you can go ahead and close out the file in Photoshop. And when you come back into Lightroom, you'll notice that there's going to be two files.
Oh, okay.
All right. And one's going to be your scan, and the other one's going to be your PSD.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Now, this is great because they're going to be one-time restoration type of projects, and I really would like to have the capability to go back and update some of them. I brought this one over just because it was a sample of all the spots, but it certainly isn't the top of the list of the ones to restore.
Right.
Using these techniques for the background because that was a big thing to do. In fact, I was thinking when you were talking, what I was thinking I might do with this one is just go back in and take that last siding that's, the backdrop,
Right.
the siding on the wall, and just make it go up 3 more courses.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. You ready for one more advanced technique? Control group. Okay. I do have an action that's called dust and scratch.
Hey, Doug,
Yeah.
can I ask my question? Because I got.
Oh, sure. Sure.
I can leave at 8:30. Profiles. I agree with a lot of what Scott Kelby writes. I don't agree with some things that he writes.
Mm-hmm.
He's right now at this time of year, I'm taking pictures of hikers with awful colors outside.
Yeah.
This time of year is just forget, but I have to do it.
Yeah.
And so if I do landscape, the people come up with too much saturation. So I go back and I use Adobe Color and then I play around with it. Betty Wiley, who teaches Lightroom, and she has taught at NECCC,
Mm-hmm.
and we had her for a whole Saturday at North Haven Camera Club. She said, always use Adobe Color. That's what she said. Now, landscape is good. I use landscape if it is a landscape because it comes out pretty good and I can play with it that way.
Yep.
Standard I don't like because it's plain enough. It's too plain, and vivid is overdone. So if I'm working with people out in horrible landscape, I do Adobe Color and I play around with certain things.
Right. Okay, so
I have a quick question. What's the lexicon these terms you're using? When you say vibrance, and is this in the
Oh,
camera?
that's
Okay.
when you're in the... Go ahead, Doc.
all right. So
Up on profile.
so hue means color. All right, hue means color. So if you say, okay, well, yellow, red, green, blue, brown, orange, when you're naming a color, you're referring to the hue. All right. So when we look at the color wheel, what we're normally seeing on the color wheel is the hue. All right. And depending on where we are around this color wheel, that's the hue that we have selected. Okay. Once you have a hue selected, from there, you have a certain amount of saturation. So how rich is that color that's being represented? Okay. So something that's very saturated is going to be very vibrant in color. Whereas something that's not as saturated is going to start looking a little bit more pastel. Okay. So what happens is when you apply a color profile, depending on the profile, all it's doing is it's manipulating the underlying colors, all right, and applying a certain amount of saturation or desaturation to specific parts. So, for example, you mentioned the landscape profile. Landscape profile is designed to boost the vibrance of greens and reds. Okay, because if you've ever gone out taking landscape photos and brought them home, you find that they're a little underwhelming because you were looking out and it's like, oh, all these beautiful trees and foliage going on, and then you bring them home and it's like, oh, they're kind of muted. Okay. So the landscape profile, what it does is it corrects for that discrepancy between camera and eye. Okay. Other profiles will target other parts, you know, so you may have a color profile that, where is it? Let's see. Artistic. You may have a color profile that, here's one that kind of boosts the purples. Okay. Here's one that kind of boosts the yellows. All right. So every time I hover, here's one that kind of boosts the cyans. Okay. So you can see the influence that these color boosts have on your image. All right. So when you're applying a color profile, it is very dependent on what type of image you're working on and what you're trying to accomplish with that image. Okay? So think of it kind of, it's not quite, but think of it like when you take a photo with your cell phone and you apply one of those filters.
Yeah.
It kind of does the same thing. All right. What it's doing is it's boosting certain colors and reducing others in order to get a look. Okay. So you can go hog wild with color profiles, and your camera has built-in color profiles to start with. All right. So you can go to your camera, you can get portrait profile, a landscape profile. You might even have a sports profile and things like that.
I used to do camera profiles, whether it was camera standard if I was outdoors with people and landscape or landscape. I was using the camera profile.
Yep.
But my cameras are older than my software. So seeing that Betty Wiley said use Adobe Color, so I figured maybe using the Adobe profile would be better only because, you know, the software is updated constantly, whereas the camera is 2017 or whatever.
Right. Yeah, color profiles, yeah, they tend to change a little bit. Okay. But you also
Yeah, Brian, well, hold it right there. Doug.
Yep.
Hold the, Brian, what I was talking about was up here on the profile, I look at Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Portrait, Standard, and Vivid. So that's what I was talking about.
yeah. Yeah. So these, you know, are so Adobe Color will give it probably a little bit more color punch. Landscape. Okay, you can see how it kind of boosted a little bit of the reds. Okay, and the greens here between the color and landscape. No, I didn't do too much to the green. All right, Adobe Portrait. You can see that it removed a lot of the red on the interior of this flower. Okay, obviously, there's a lot of red in skin pigment. Okay, and part of this has to do with how cameras record color. All right, different camera brands, even different camera models within the same brand may record color slightly differently than what we see. All right, because it's a mechanical process. All right, it's interpreting what it's seeing. And remember, it's interpreting based on 3 black and white images. Okay, so there's a lot of error right off the bat. All right, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, your camera lies to you. It lies to you when you pull it out on the field to take an exposure, and it lies to you with the colors and everything else. Okay. Now, I know my Canon cameras, it tends to kind of oversaturate reds a little bit too much. So I'm always fighting against that oversaturated red. All right. So you can go and play with these. All right. Here's Vivid. Look what it did to the red here. Okay. It really punched it. Okay. So you can go through these and get it kind of as close to the look that appeals to you. All right. So again, this would be a step and part of that whole normalizing thing, because you want to normalize your image and then you want to build your creative vision on top of that. All right. So I want to normalize it and start working towards that artistic vision. Okay. So depending on what it is I want it to do with this rose, you know, I might pick one of these profiles. Do I want it a little bit redder or do I want it a little bit blonder? Okay. These are artistic decisions that you need to make. Okay. But, the blanket comment of only using one color profile and not touch anything else, I think you're going to be doing yourself a disservice if you can get a step closer to the final image that you want to present by using a specific color profile. Why wouldn't you? It's like saying, okay, well, I need to pound nails in this wall. Well, I have a hammer right here, but there's a wrench here and there's a metal pipe. Let me try the metal pipe first, see if I can get that nail in. Why? You got a perfectly good hammer right there. You know? Or in her case, she's probably saying, I used a hammer on everything.
Basically, it was that.
Yeah, you know, so, okay. But, in her defense, all right, I'm kind of the same way in certain things, but I also understand that the decisions I make are based on gaining something in favor of something else. So you've all heard me say that when I'm out in the field, I'm rather lazy about my photography, in the fact that I don't want to be messing with a lot of buttons and dials and settings if I don't have to. The fewer things I have to manipulate in the field, the fewer mistakes I'm going to make. And one of those things is my color balance. All right. I don't touch my color balance on my camera at all. I leave it to shadow or to shade or cloudy. I got a little bug flying around me. You know, whatever the camera happens to be on. Sometimes I will change it if I have a client looking over my shoulder. That's the only time I'll change it. Okay. So like, for example, when I do events and 90% of the time when I'm doing events, I'm shooting with flash. So I'm going to put my camera on flash, the white balance for flash. Simply because I know during my, you know, going around taking pictures of people, I'm going to be showing the back of my camera. And I don't want to turn it and show a photo that's all blown out yellow because I left it in shadow. Okay. So for that reason, I'll change it. But otherwise, I don't care, because I know that's one of the things I am definitely going to be manipulating in post-processing, because I understand that whatever I set in my camera That's for the JPEG preview. It does not port out with the raw file. The raw file could care less what color balance my camera is on. Okay. And because I know I'm going to be changing it, I don't care. All right. So for that, I will definitely do a blanket comment like she does and say, oh, you know, who cares? I leave it on shade and I don't bother dealing with it. Okay. So for her, that may be part of her philosophy. All right. She knows she's going to be manipulating the colors elsewhere. Okay. However, I would argue that certain color profiles are once you set it, it's going to progress through the entirety of your photo edit. So at some point, you may be fighting against something you set right at the very beginning, that a little forethought and a little change would have alleviated the struggle and the headaches of having to correct for later on down the road. Okay? Because that's a big issue. All right? Setting your color profile, that's a big issue. And as a matter of fact, you've heard me say it in Lightroom. All right, in Lightroom, all right. What's one of the things that I tell you to check? The camera calibration. Your camera calibration, in the stack, they put it all the way down at the bottom. Okay, that should be right at the top. That should be one of the first things you should visit, because just modifying these sliders, all right, look at this. Look what it does to the colors of this rose. Okay? You can completely make it look different. All right? And what you're doing is you're manipulating the individual color channels, and it's setting the color from this point on through your entire post-processing workflow. Okay? I would never suggest, starting your workflow, get all your colors looking the way you want, and then come back to the calibration, because it's just going to create havoc with everything you did prior to it. All right. So this is why I said this should be at the top. Calibration should be at the top. I know a lot of people that will never, ever touch calibration, because one, they don't understand it. It's going into the individual channels, and a lot of times they don't think, oh, I don't need to touch it. Okay. But this is where kind of understanding what the tools do will give you a hint as to where they will fit into your workflow. All right. All right. So I know we kind of got into deep waters with your question there, but hopefully it gives you a little bit more insight.
Thank you. You know what I should have done is I should have changed the white balance. Maybe that would have helped. See, I always use auto white balance because my camera is pretty good at dealing with white balance.
Right.
9 times out of 10. Yeah. 99% of the time.
Your camera?
Yeah.
So you have your camera set at auto white balance.
All the
Okay.
time. Mainly because I could be in a situation where I'm outdoors in a certain type of atmosphere.
Right.
Then I have to go indoors where the lighting is different, fluorescent or whatever. And
Yeah.
I could easily forget to change the white balance.
Okay.
So my camera is always auto white balance.
Okay.
I can change it because I always shoot raw. So
Correct.
I always shoot raw.
Yep. So when it brings it in, it's going to read whatever your camera was set to, and it's going to copy that and use that as a reference.
Yes.
Okay. So you have, when you bring it in, your white balance is going to be as shot,
Yes.
and it's going to register here. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Now, once you're imported, do you ever press this button that says auto?
Yes.
Guess what it does to your white balance?
What? It does what?
Guess what it does to your white balance?
It changes it again?
Yep, because now Lightroom is determining your white balance.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So again, you have to understand what the tools do. All right. And what you're telling Lightroom is use your know-how, your best guess scenario as to how my images should be edited based on, whatever factors it's built into Lightroom. All right. And if Lightroom says, oh, your camera shot this a little bit too yellow, I'm gonna cool it off. It's gonna do it. It doesn't care what your camera says. It doesn't care if your camera got it really, really close. Okay. If you're lucky, Lightroom will agree with what your camera says. Okay. And will keep it, or, move it a couple points. If it moves it a couple points, who cares? You're never going to notice a difference. Okay.
Yeah.
However, guess what's missing out of that whole equation between the camera and Lightroom? You. All right. So that's where you have to come in at the end and say, okay, I see what you guys did here, Mr. Camera, Mr. Lightroom, but that's not what I want. I'm going to do this, this, and this. Okay. And that's where the artistic processing comes in. Okay.
Okay.
All right. But yeah, just remember when you press the auto button on Lightroom, it's going to override everything your camera does. Okay, for the most part, it's not gonna override your color profile, whatever the camera sets. All right, it's gonna keep that. Okay, or whatever you set on import, it's gonna keep that. All right, so it's basically just gonna take this from here down and manipulate it. Okay, and that includes your white balance. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I got to roll. Hey, Doug, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Likewise, stay safe, and
You too, Brian. Merry Christmas.
we will
Happy New
see
Year.
you next year. Oh, and Alan says Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody. He's down in Florida enjoying that nice warm weather.
Without the heavy rain.
Yeah.
By the way, I've seen some photos of this afternoon. I saw some photos of rainbows. So once the sun.
Oh, rainbow. Yeah.
Some rainbows out.
Yeah, I saw a few people post photos of some of the localized flooding. One in particular, they went down to Indian Well Park, down on the Housatonic River, and the whole park, the whole beach area was flooded under.
Oh.
It was pretty impressive. Dangerous,
Okay.
but impressive.
Have a good one.
Okay. All right. Okay. Bri, I'm gonna. You still good? You still with me?
I'm still here.
Okay. I got one more trick up the dust and scratch. Okay. So I have a little action here that's dust and scratch, and all it does is it creates a layer copy. All right. It then what is it? It does a blur effect, and it kind of well, you'll see. I'm gonna go ahead and run the action All right. So here is applying the dust and scratch filter. Okay. And you can preview it and you can see how well it does. All right. So here we go. All right. The radius. All right. Because a lot of these are very small. You don't need to go very, very big on the radius. Okay. 7, 8 points looks good. And then the threshold is how much of that contrast it wants to tackle. All right. The higher you go, the more of that grain is going to come through. So be careful. Okay. All right. So it's just finding that balance. But the one thing you're going to notice, if you look at all the edges kind of get softened up a little bit. All right. So you have to decide, how much of that softening am I willing to deal with. All right. And then you hit OK. All right. And what it does is it applies a mask. So now if I hide that mask, that's what my image looks like. Okay. And you can see that, oops, let me zoom out. Okay. It's very soft. All right. You can see that, right? We're losing a lot of the local contrast in the texture. Okay. But because it's applying a mask, now what I can do is I can go to, oops, let me go over here. I can go to areas like this, all right, and with a brush, white as my foreground color, okay. I make my brush down here, all right. I can brush in and kind of get rid of some of these. Yeah, see, I can get rid of some of these scratches, all right? But because we used a blurring effect, all right, we're going to get that problem where it contrasts very heavily against the grain that's already there. All right. So this is something that obviously you can't use in all situations, but sometimes this comes in really, really handy for kind of like tackling smoother areas. Okay. All right. But the nice thing about this is that we can take it another step and apply a sharpening effect, kind of similar to a high pass sharpen, for example. So let me go ahead and let me do a high pass sharpen. I'm just going to do it. All right. And let me go and just turn that. No, that's not what I want. I want to turn that off. Okay. All right. We can use a high pass sharpen and get a little bit of that texture back. Okay. Probably not enough. All right. Yeah. See, now we're getting artifacting. All right. Yeah, this image is probably a little bit too whatchamacallit, a little bit too grainy.
5 gon's the word you're looking for.
Well, yeah, it's a little too grainy. So,
Yeah.
But there are ways of being able to work around it. All right. I think if it wasn't as grainy, that dust and scratch might work a little bit better. All right. But
you can use that dust and scratch against a back layer. Like, for instance, in this case, it looked like you wouldn't want to even do the dust and scratch to the musician, just all that background stuff.
Yes. Yeah, you can do that. Exactly. And then tackle, the musician in a slightly different way, you know. But that doesn't scratch, you just got to realize that it works by softening the details. All right.
Right.
It's using a blur effect. So, take it for, with a grain of salt. I think your best bet for an image like this is to use that clone stamp tool. Yeah, it's a little bit more, slower to work with, but it's going to give you the best result at the end, because it retains that that texture. Oops. Dun, dun, dun. See that? You just got to be careful where.
I was just looking at some of the other photos I took that same day of some of different musicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the worst ones.
Yeah.
So.
All right, buddy, you got your work cut out for you. I don't envy you, because I know exactly. I know exactly what you got to do to this thing,
Some people take up knitting.
Yeah, I actually have an old photograph that I scanned, that I started cleaning up, and it's one of those where 100% of it needed to be cleaned up, because it was I don't have the negative for it. It was a studio shot. So the photographer isn't even alive, I don't think. It was a studio shot, and it was a wallet size that's been sitting in my wallet since 1983. So it is just horrendously abused, and I was trying to clean it up and bring it back to life. I got about halfway done before I called it quits. And eventually I'll get back to it. Who knows? One day. I don't even know where it is right now. I'd have to find it out, but it's bad. So, all right. Anyway, you're the last man standing.
I'm out of here then.
Have yourself a great holiday. If I don't talk to you between now and then, have a great New Year's, and we'll see you next year.
All right. Thanks so much, Doug.
All right, buddy. As always, have fun.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience, from the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.